It's a disappointment. What happened? We waited 8 years for this. A game that looks and plays almost identically to the original Hollow Knight, with a character that controls like molasses. A game that feels floaty. A game that feels unfinished. Where is the creativity? Where is the originality? Why exactly are we retreading through old ground to play exactly the same game that we played last time? It is insane to me how in the 2000s, Nintendo gave us Metroid Fusion, a game that was radically different than Super in every way, shape, and form, that had a completely different premise and formula and gameplay loop, and yet was far better than this. Now, most other YouTubers are trying to tell you this is Game of the Year worthy, or that this is one of the best games ever made. Absolutely not. Not only does this game pale in comparison to the far superior Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, it doesn't live up to the legacy of the original Hollow Knight. And in fact, this is the crux of my argument against it. The thing that I noticed playing this, and the thing that nobody else wants to talk about or address, what exactly does Silksong do better than the original Hollow Knight? Take your time. Does it look better? Does it have better gameplay? Does it have better boss fights? Does it have more of anything, really? And the answer is a resounding no. At this stage, a lot of people haven't realized this, but the map in Hollow Knight Silksong is quite a bit more streamlined than Hollow Knight. There isn't a lot of wandering around, finding new pathways and endlessly making new discoveries, discovering new locations, and progressing through the game. The game gives you an endpoint destination immediately, and you're just expected to figure out how to stop walking around in circles and figure out how to progress. So instead of like the Hollow Knight methodology, where everywhere you go leads you to a new, interesting area with its own unique theme and concept, with its own unique enemy types and just bosses to fight, in Silksong, what you'll be going through is repetitive, boring-looking locations that very strongly resemble locations in the original Hollow Knight that don't have anywhere near the same level of thought put into the level design, the enemy design, the boss design. Everything about Silksong is a massive step down from the original Hollow Knight. And this is my core problem with this. What exactly does Silksong do better? What did they spend 8 years doing? Because it wasn't on the story. It wasn't on the NPCs or the gameplay. Like, I have no idea how it took 7 years to put this out. Nintendo put out The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which was a much bigger game, which was featured far more changes to the core gameplay loop and structure of Breath of the Wild. That was a way better game in general. They got that out quicker than Team Cherry got out Silksong. And that was a major AAA production. Nothing about Silksong required 7 years of development. To me, it really does feel as if the developers were just sitting around working maybe like an hour a day and not really putting a lot of time and effort into the production, because there are so many weird, iffy aspects of Silksong that make no sense. Most particularly, some of the new gameplay changes, the dive, okay? Instead of having a downward slash, you're given this really terrible dive that seems primarily like movement based, but isn't practical to use in actual combat situations at all because of the duration of the attack, because of the way it works. Like, they basically took away your downward slash and gave you this really, really awful looking dive and didn't really think anything of it. Things like that make me feel as if they didn't really put a lot of time or thought into how this game is designed, because there have been a handful of times where I've gotten something before I felt like I was supposed to and suddenly just found myself in this really weird situation. For example, I went ahead and went to this place called the Citadel of the Beast, and there's a boss there, and you beat it and you unlock like a new fighting style. First of all, the fighting style system was a garbage idea to begin with. Instead of having one functional style that you have to learn to master to beat the game, instead you have a bunch of different styles that are all very, very bad in different ways. So, of course, the hunter style has that really terrible dive. The hunter style has this completely, like, just messed up healing mechanic in a game where the healing mechanic is essential. And the Reaper style has this really weird, slow downward slash. So first of all, you have to unlock a downward slash that isn't even as good as the one you got in the last game. But why exactly are there 3 different fighting styles with all of these blatant weaknesses that make all of them just impractical? I am just going to stick with the one that's most similar to the Knight's play style. I don't want to mess around with these fighting styles that don't really offer a whole lot of benefits, only drawbacks. So I realize that I don't want to use the beast style. I get the beast style, I equip it, and I'm just like, okay, I cannot use this right now because I was in an area with a lot of environmental hazards, and as a result of that, because of the way the beast style works, you can only heal when you hit other enemies. So if you're like me and you're just blasting through the game and not really paying attention to like the terrible enemies that are very easily bypassed by just sprinting past them, let's just unequip this and go back to the hunter style. So I go back to the menu and I realize there is no way to unequip the beast style. I go through all the menus, I look through it, I investigate, and there's no way to switch it back. And for the longest time, I thought the change was permanent. It wasn't until I got the Reaper style later that then I was given the option to switch between the 3 of them. Then I was given the opportunity to choose which style I wanted. But the fact of the matter is, I was forced into a fighting style I did not want because Team Cherry did not seem to think that anybody would not want to play with the beast style. It was ridiculous. There are other examples of this kind of flawed design. Like, for example, there's this weird quest system where you have to waste time and gather drops from enemies that don't really seem to contribute anything at all other than padding. There is just, as a whole, there just seems to be no real evolution from Hollow Knight. The new area, the new kingdom isn't interesting. The new story isn't interesting. Like, Hornet isn't an interesting character to play as, right? I'm 9 hours in now. What exactly is this game supposed to be about? How exactly am I not aware whether or not this is a sequel or a prequel? Like, I think it must be a prequel considering some of the things that happened in this game, but it hasn't been directly stated. And I just feel this strong urge to just kind of be like, what exactly is this game? How does it fit into the original story? Like, what does it mean? Like, I don't feel invested in what's going on at all because none of it makes any sense. Everything they throw at you just seems to be sloppily done with no thought or consideration. Like, here's a good example for you. Hornet reveals the reason she was kidnapped at the beginning. Hornet reveals why the bugs of the Citadel came after her. And it's because she can produce silk. Like, that is the actual explanation as to why Hornet has been taken to this foreign land, is that she can produce silk, which is apparently, it's a super rare skill in this part of the world. And it's like, that's what they came up with? This is like their big plan for the Princess of Hollownest. Like, oh, what are we going to do after Hollownest is safe? Oh, I know, have her be kidnapped for her silk. What? Like, it has no weight to it. It has no substance. It doesn't feel as if, like, it ties into the plot of the original game at all. Like, it just feels like some weird fan fiction, just generic plot. Like, I would put this up there with, like, Bowser kidnapping Princess Peach because he likes her. Okay, that's all the explanation you need for Super Mario. But for something like Hollow Knight, which is supposed to be way more complex, like, it just doesn't draw you in and make you care about what's happening. And I think a big reason for that is that Silksong seems completely unwilling to move away from the plot of Hollow Knight, from the general formula of Hollow Knight, even though it doesn't really make any sense. So, for example, there are a lot more NPCs in this game. You see a lot more NPCs just sitting around going on their pilgrimages. You know, you're seeing them like interact with other NPCs. Like there are like more towns in this one. Okay, that's all right, but it has the same general format of just like, oh, but there are lots of crazy bugs out there. You know, there's no thought put into this idea that, like, you know, maybe the enemies should be like actual predators. Like, maybe they shouldn't act like they do in the original Hollow Knight. Maybe the situation is different and like enemies should behave differently. No, you're just supposed to believe that for whatever reason, in this area that's supposed to be like some kind of kingdom, that the bugs look and act very similarly to how they do in Hollow Nest, with no real thought into consideration put into the world building and the general structure and just like what this means for the setting. In fact, like, I brought this up during my during my stream, like, wasn't Hollow Nest supposed to be the only kingdom on the planet? Like, didn't bugs lose their sentience when they left Hollow Nest? Like, wasn't that like a core part of the prequel comic? Like, I find myself very confused by the mere existence of like some other kingdom. I find myself very confused about what's actually happening. And as a result of that, I don't feel this sense of mystery or intrigue that you got out of the original Hollow Knight. I feel this sense of just like, this is just low effort slop. Nothing about this setup makes any sense to me. Nothing about this concept is appealing to me. Like, I'm playing through this game and I'm unlocking moves that Hornet had in Hollow Knight. And it's just this very confusing thing. Like, why could she not run to begin with? You know, like, why do I have to unlock a ranged attack? You know, like, why exactly is the game structured the way it is? Like, I feel very strongly that this is, at its core, a DLC. People keep saying that like this is some original new thing, but no. Like the assets are reused, the game just looks identical to Hollow Knight. There have been no advancements in the game or how it's structured or like any major changes to the formula. Like it's basically the exact same game with a gender flipped protagonist. You play as Hornet this time. Like to me, all of this game's problems can be summed up with one phrase. It's just a DLC. That's all this is. Like, they didn't put a lot of effort into it. They didn't put a lot of time into it. They didn't really think about how to design, like, a game around Hornet's completely different capabilities than the Knight. They didn't really think about how to evolve her character and make her interesting. Like, all they did was come up with some lazy reason for Hornet to be the main character. Like, oh, she was kidnapped. And then made an entire game around it. It is shocking how someone who is a huge fan of the Hornet character in Hollow Knight, comes away from this game feeling like they kind of did her dirty in this game because they don't really do a good job expanding her character and making her fun and interesting. She's not a silent protagonist in this. She does talk, but at the same time, like all the little tidbits you hear about her and her background and her relationship with other characters, like it's not terribly interesting. She's like that chick that you really like and you're just like, oh, I really want to get to know her better. And then you talk to her and you realize that like, oh no, she's basic. That's basically what happened to Hornet here. The character... her core appeal was being this mysterious waif of Hollowness with no real clear idea of who she is and what she's doing, right? Hornet was this mystery, and now the mystery has been resolved, and you're supposed to still care, You're supposed to still be invested. You're supposed to still care about what happens to Hornet after Hollow Knight, like it's just like they didn't do anything, like there's nothing about this setup, about this character, about this game that really makes me wonder, like, man, I wonder what Hornet is doing right now. Like the character just isn't that well fleshed out, isn't that interesting, was not really capable of carrying a game on her own, and yet we were led to believe she could. We were led to believe she could just replace the Knight and just be her own protagonist with no real thought put into her skill set or the level design. It is downright embarrassing how disappointing this game is. Hollow Knight was never as good as a Metroid-like as people wanted you to believe. It always paled in comparison to legit Metroid or Castlevania titles. But I do think we as fans do need to start spelling this out for the community, is that simply having lengthy giant maps doesn't make your game better than Metroid. Hollow Knight Silksong has these huge open areas that just kind of go around in circles with nothing interesting to find, see, or do, while Metroid is so much more compact, has better pacing, and is just all around more fun to play. And I do think that is the core issue with the structure of these games, is that they are made with this idea that having a bigger map makes them better, which simply isn't true. Especially in this game, where in spite of the huge maps, they are fairly linear. You are railroaded and essentially expected to go from point A to point B. There is just this very, very real feeling that Silksong just can't live up to the video games that inspired it. It's not as good as Zelda 2. It's not as good as Pikmin. It's not as good as Castlevania. So again, if you're not a fan of those games, if you haven't played those games to death already, there really is no reason to play this. And that's my big major takeaway when it comes to Silksong, especially when I see people like try and say this is like one of the best Metroid likes ever. Like, no, absolutely not. Not even close, really. But the simple fact of the matter is that the vast majority of Hollow Knight fans don't have the experience with the genre to really understand why something like Super Metroid or Castlevania Portrait of Ruin is better than this. That is something that the industry at large needs to come to terms with, is that just because some indie game is popular with online audiences does not necessarily mean it's better than the competition. And you're seeing this a lot, especially with Metroid, because a lot of people will try and tell you that Hollow Knight outperformed Metroid and that it's a way more popular game. And the answer to that is a resounding no. Because Metroid has more than 2 games in its lineup. Because it's an ongoing series that's been continuing for 40 years. Because games like Super Metroid are available for free through Nintendo Switch Online. Because of the resale market. Like Metroid is clearly a bigger IP than Hollow Knight ever will be, but fanboys take sales numbers out of context and just prop up Hollow Knight to try and continue this facade that this game is on the same level of quality as a Metroid release. The actual sales numbers do not matter. What matters is how much people play and enjoy these games. And Hollow Knight is a very interesting case because a lot of people who buy these games don't get past the second boss. You can look at the achievements on Steam or PSN or whatever and see this for a fact, but Hollow Knight just doesn't have a lot of people that are willing to play it through to the end because of just how challenging it can be. In a lot of ways, Hollow Knight is kind of the From slop of the Metroidvania genre. It's the same kind of mindset where, like, people just get fired up about this game because, like, well, all these people say it's good, and then they don't really play or enjoy it. Or if they do, they get through the entire thing using a guide and don't really understand the value of intuition and figuring things out for yourself. That is the current state of Hollow Knight, is that this is, to a certain extent, a meme game. Now, obviously, Hollow Knight is a better meme game than something like Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale or the Fall Guys or like whatever else slop people are playing right now. Like, again, it's higher quality than that stuff, which is probably why it has such a dedicated following. But, like, you're not comparing Hollow Knight to other meme games. Like, you compare Hollow Knight to, like, some of the best games ever made, you know? You're comparing it to, like, Super Metroid and, like, Castlevania and all of that, when it really has never been able to compete. And I think if Hollow Knight fans actually took the time to play something like Metroid Dread and realize, like, why it's better than the original Hollow Knight in every way, shape, and form, like, they would come away with a new perspective. You know, they would understand that they were wrong and that Nintendo is just better than their favorite thing. But they will never, ever, ever do that because it simply isn't allowed by gamer culture to acknowledge Nintendo's superiority over these kind of developers. You are not going to see people acknowledge that Tears of the Kingdom had a quicker turnaround time than this did. You are not going to see people acknowledge that Metroid Dread is a better title than this. You are not going to see people acknowledge that Samus Aran is a better female lead than Hornet. You know, all of these matter. You know, all of these things matter when it comes to, like, the quality of the games and the experiences they give people and what we end up remembering years down the line. It needs to be understood that no indie dev anywhere is ever going to touch Nintendo's iconic franchises. I recently had the very great displeasure of looking through IGN's top 100 video games of all time, and it immediately struck me how Final Fantasy VII, which once upon a time would have been number 2, is now way at the bottom at like 98. In another couple of years, perhaps before the end of the decade, Final Fantasy VII will be off that list entirely. And it will be entirely because of the game journal industry shilling whatever new game is coming out. You know, whether it's The Last of Us Part 2 or like Borderlands 4 or like whatever slop. Like, all-time classics that people actually genuinely like will be kicked out of the top 100 by corrupt gaming journalists who will not even have any real experience with these games. Hollow Knight, in essence, is the very textbook example of something that's worshipped by people who don't know the first thing about video games. Something that is propped up and exemplified as a standout title in video games when in reality there really isn't anything noteworthy or interesting about it. At its core, it's just a lesser Castlevania game. And that's always been the case, but because no real Castlevania game has been produced in 20 years, because nobody really talks about those games as being valid contenders for being the best ever in that genre, they are completely written off and ignored, even though they are far better than this. And that goes doubly so for the Metroid games. Hollow Knight, among actual core enthusiasts, will never, ever, ever have the prestige that Metroid and Castlevania enjoys. These games will not continue to be relevant. People are going to lose interest in them, just as they lost interest in Celeste or Disco Elysium or Undertale or whatever else meme game has come out in recent years. The reality is, Hollow Knight is just not on the same level of quality as the all-time greats. And that is something that we really do need to address going into this release. I have not finished Silksong yet. I've put like about 9 hours into it, but I can tell you for a fact that this game does not live up to the hype, that it is not as good as the original Hollow Knight, that this is not as good as games like Metroid Dread or the like, and this is not really something that I think should be even in the running for Game of the Year. This has been a massive disappointment for me, someone who genuinely really liked the original Hollow Knight for what it was. Silksong took far too long to come out, only to deliver very, very little.